thank you for listening, to Christina. Christina, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you, Ingo. What a nice introduction. Also looks like you have a fantastic speaker lineup coming up. So I'm very happy to be able to start this off, this July setting. So yeah, I'm gonna share my screen so that we can get going. So what I'm going to talk about today is how to build better habits with nudging. Inga already said this. The question is, how can nudging fit into this idea of creating motivation, sustaining motivation? Do we even need motivation in order to change behavior? Inga already said this. I'm still an assistant professor, so still on the lowest ladder, but working on it at the University of Copenhagen with a PhD in economics. And couple of years already into my PhD, I thought it's actually so sad that so much of the great knowledge that we have within research isn't really being brought out to a broader audience. Of course, we're teaching our students, and then we're also doing research and maybe talking to a few policymakers, but it's not really getting out there to people who can really use this knowledge, either within private organizations or within the public sector, for example. So that's when I started giving talks and workshops on nudging, and then at some point I met my co-founder, Nurit Nobel, who together with me then started Impactually, a behavioral science management consultancy. And there for almost 3 years now, we've been doing a lot of different work, of course, training a lot of people, but also doing consultancy projects. For example, for Stockholm City, we're mostly active in Sweden, so this is maybe if you don't recognize all these brands, but ICA, one of Sweden's largest supermarket chains, we're going to look into a case study with them later on. The Environmental Protection Agency in Sweden, Systembolaget, the monopoly that sells alcohol in Sweden. So yeah, so different areas that we've been working with, always with the purpose of trying to help people do things that are in their best interest. So what are we going to do today? Obviously, we don't have a lot of time. Usually I do maybe 1 or 2 day workshops. So this is going to be more like a taster of what nudging is and how can you maybe use nudging in your daily work. So something we're going to look at first is, why is behavior change so difficult? Why is it really that we have these really good intentions, but we have a hard time acting on them? Then we're going to talk a bit about what is nudging. I've also seen some familiar faces in the list here, so I know that they already know what nudging is, but we're going to go to a very basic level, and so that everybody, even if you have no clue at the moment, can follow along the workshop. And then we're going to do a small start of a case study to give you an idea of, if I want to work with nudging, how is it that I do that? Well, let's start with a really easy exercise. So imagine this morning you went by a coffee shop and got yourself a coffee. You see 3 different sizes of coffees. Which one do you think is the most popular one? So just use the chat function. Just what's the first thing that comes to mind? Which size do you think most people choose? Okay, we see this very clear here: middle, medium, middle. 1 or 2 large ones. Are those the ones joining from the US? Mostly it's the middle ones. Of course, others can be sold too, but it's quite clear that we find that it's usually the middle option. So when they did this experiment, they saw that a lot of people were choosing this middle option, and then they went back to these people and did a survey, and they said, so I've seen you taking the middle option. Why is this? So why did you choose this one? Not the smallest, not the largest, but the medium-sized one. And because we're, of course, terribly rational people, I mean, we have the right answer for this, right? So these people said, well, the small one didn't have enough coffee, and the big one had too much coffee, and the medium one had just the right amount of coffee. Okay, fair enough, right? I mean, who's to say that that was not the right amount of coffee? So what do you think happened now? What is now the most popular size? Again, use the chat function too. Middle one again, right? So perfectly right, you're all already behavioral scientists here. Again, the most popular option was the medium one. And again, people were asked and said, so why did you choose the medium one? I said, well, the small one had too little coffee and the large one had too much coffee, and the medium one had just the right amount of coffee. So this is already a little bit silly, right? Because we know that, or what we see is that depending on the context of where we see this cup of coffee, we feel that that's the right amount of coffee by comparing it to something else. So our brain has a very hard time with deciding on something completely out of context. And depending on how the context is structured, that can then affect also our decisions. So this was a very basic example to start with, but that's a little bit the mindset I want you to keep in mind throughout this course. So think about what is it, how is the environment shaping our behavior? And then when nudging comes in, the question will be, how can we use that environment in a way that helps us change behavior for the better? So let's think about it a bit more. Why is behavior change so difficult? When we work with nudging, especially the way I work with it coming from the economic side, this might be a little bit different with people who approach this maybe more from marketing or psychology, but especially from behavioral economics and the way that nudging was originally designed, the idea is that we have what we call intention to action gaps. So the idea is that people have good intentions already, right? We want to eat healthy, we want to exercise, we want to do our work on time, we want to spend more time with our friends, we want to call our mother on the weekend. So we have all these very good intentions, and we also have the correct information. So we know where the gym is, we know that we shouldn't be eating donuts every day, we have the phone number of our mother to call her, we have the necessary technology. This can be things like money, right? So often maybe we already paid for the gym card, or let's say we want to learn a new language. We own a smartphone with which we can download the language learning app. So there's no technological or price constraints to carry out our behavior. And then also when we're asked, these are also the intentions we state. So if somebody will ask you and say, do you want to learn Spanish? Or you will go to your friend and say, yeah, I'm really planning to learn Spanish, or I want to lose some weight, or I want to get up earlier in the morning, or I want to eat more vegetables. But yet we don't observe the expected outcome, right? So we could say, well, everything is in place. We know how to do it. We have access to how to do it. And we say that that's what we want, and yet still we don't carry it. So a little bit like Homer Simpson here saying, I was planning to go to the gym today, but then something happened on the way home and somehow I ended up on the couch watching Netflix and eating chips. So that wasn't really what I was intending to do, even though this morning, this was really my best intentions. And that's really where nudging is going to come in. So this idea where we don't have that maybe spark of motivation, but also first to actually understand, why does this happen? So why do we end up like Homer Simpson on the couch? So one way to think about this is that we have two types of thinking. Obviously, this is not a neuroscience brain model, right? This is just a way to think about how we make decisions. And this was made famous by Daniel Kahneman, who said that there is a system 2 and a system 1 in our brain with which we make decisions. Our system 2, it's a little bit like Mr. Spock, right? So this is the Star Trek figure. He's almost like a robot. So if he decides to go to the gym after work, he goes to the gym after work. And these are the decisions we make in our life, which are slow, reflective, self-aware, logical, right? This is in a way, the good person in us, the one that thinks about the future and that makes all these great plans, that on the 1st of January buys a gym card and a journal and a meditation app and all these things that we're planning to do in the future. But then we have our system 1, and those are these more fast and automatic decisions. They're easy, they're led by emotions. But actually quite a lot of decisions we make every day are made by the system 1. And there's also a good reason for that, because if we were to take all our decisions with our system 2, so all slow and deliberate, none of you would have made it here now for this talk, right? You would be still probably either just getting up, or depending on where you are in the world, still deciding whether you want coffee or tea for breakfast and what you should wear and should you take an umbrella and how are you going to get to work. So it would be far too It would take far too long if we would make all decisions with our system 2. But the problem is that our system 1 is influenced by what we call cognitive biases, or by using heuristics. So in order to speed up this decision making, we have to take shortcuts. And these shortcuts can be things like social norms, for example. So this would mean, well, we're in the supermarket, it's Corona time, we don't really know where we're supposed to stand. So we look at, okay, where are other people standing? And then we try to take a similar distance. So that's maybe not a deliberate thinking about it, but we're just trying to act in a similar way. Everybody's getting in line somewhere, we'll get in line too. But also things like cognitive load, for example, that means when we're very stressed and when we have a lot of things going on, then we're much more likely to revert to our default behavior, right? So you might think, oh, I want to eat something more healthy, but then it's a very stressful day, and then you just grab the same thing you always eat, which is maybe not what you were planning to do. Other things might be overconfidence, right? So if we look at statistics, we think that, well, I mean, sure, whatever, not wearing a helmet while cycling, that's dangerous for other people, but not for us. And then that's how we sometimes get off track, especially when we make these very fast decisions. So the problem is when we want to change people's behavior, it's sometimes hard to reach these system 1 decisions. So these fast decisions, because often when we think about behavior change, we think about, and this is especially now coming from a policy context, but it also works in privately or with private companies, we have the set of how to steer people's behavior. One is through regulations, right? If you say you can't smoke in this building, then most people will not smoke in the building because it's not allowed. So then that's very strict. Or if you don't want people to eat sweets, you'll just not serve any, and then they also can't eat them. Then you could have monetary incentives. So this is what we would call either taxes or subsidies, but it can also be getting things for free, or any type of maybe a perk. You get a free iPad if you sign up for this, those types of things. That also gets people to change behavior. That's classic incentives. And then lastly, we have information. And this is what often, if you work in communication, for example, what people start with first, right? They say, oh, well, we have to educate people, right? If during the pandemic, people aren't washing their hands, maybe they don't know that they have to wash their hands, or maybe they don't know how to wash their hands, or maybe they don't know that they need soap to use their hands, wash their hands, right? So this is this very logical educational part of it. But the problem is these ones don't really work for these very fast decisions that are influenced by our cognitive biases. And then that's where nudging comes in. So nudging is really about redesigning the context in which we make decisions to make it easier to make these right decisions. And we're going to practice that on a couple of examples. But that's the idea here. So that's having this additional policy tool in addition to the 3 that I just mentioned. So the formal definition of nudging is then anything that affects our behavior in a predictable way, but without forbidding any options, right? That would be the regulations, or without significantly changing their economic incentives. So nothing getting something for free, or putting a tax on something, or making people pay for something. But that, you might be thinking now, okay, that sounds very vague. I mean, that's a lot of things. But if you think about how nudging actually came into being, so what's also this book, I don't know, some of you have maybe seen the cover, the book Nudge, but that's really what this book is about. It's saying, well, as economists in particular, we use these traditional policy instruments to affect behavior, but there's so many things that, for example, marketers already know for a long time that also affect human behavior, but that we're not using, and we don't really have a term for it, and we can't classify it, we can't compare it to something. So it's kind of the extra category, all these other things that still matter that don't fit under the other headings. So in that way, nudging is in addition to our toolkit of changing behavior, but it speaks to these system 1 decisions, these fast decisions that we don't really think about that much, and that cannot really be affected by the information that we know how to do things, or by the price. If we really want to eat a donut, anybody's ever been at the airport, right? It's very expensive to get a bag of M&Ms at the airport, but sometimes you just really crave them, so you really go for them, even though it's maybe quite a ridiculous price to pay. So let's do a little exercise to see what the differences are between these different policy instruments and different ways of steering behavior. So again, we can use the chat function. So all of you are probably, depending on which country you're in right now, some of you might be in countries where mask wearing is encouraged or even mandatory, but everybody else has probably also seen this in the news. So if we now think about the goal of getting more people to wear masks, we can think about using all these 4 policy instruments. So if you think about regulation, what would be the most straightforward thing to do? Or what have you seen, maybe a sign somewhere that would fall under this category of getting people to change behavior? Okay. Okay, someone's saying fines. Yeah, fines is maybe more in the in second part. It's a monetary incentives. Laws. Yeah, hola, saying laws. Okay, Courtney's saying instructional signs. That's maybe more in the information part. Mandatory to wear a mask in public. Yes, mandatory in public transportation. Exactly, right? So that would be our first point here. So many stores now, definitely in the US, also in Berlin, where I'm from, we've seen this on public transport. They say here, okay, so regulation would be if you don't wear a mask, you cannot enter this store, right? So that's clear, and you might get a fine, but mostly you're just not going to be allowed in, right? So that's the rule. So here we have a strict regulation, a strict choice. But then some of you have already also said, okay, we could maybe have fines for shop owners. But what about in a positive sense? How else could we incentivize maybe people to take a mask? How do we get people to do something? I don't know. If you were a store and you wanted people to try out something, what would you do then? Exactly. Discount, have it available for free. Very good. Hola, Courtney. Yes. Loyalty, but 2 get 1 free rebates. Exactly. So here I have a picture from, this is I think in Singapore, where they say, claim your free mask today. So they have these vending machines and you just get it for free. Or also a good idea from Gudrun, free mask was a purchase, right? So giving out things for free can also change behavior, because then I might, if I have it, I might just well put it on. And people love things that are for free, right? We know that. And then some of you have already talked about this information before, right? So some of that we have to let them know about the risks. I've seen that before. Instructional signs, right? So now we could think about the factual information. What will we do here? And this is, we've also seen a lot in the different countries. This is, I think, from the UK. These informational signs about how to wear a mask, how to wear it correctly, when to wear it, how much does it help us. So then we have this factual information here. But even though we have these things, and probably also having these regulations is of course a quite strong way to change behavior. But now we can think about what else could we do, what that gets people to want to wear masks, but it's not part of these strict regulations, monetary incentives, so it doesn't make them for free, or it gives additional information. Do you have any ideas? Yeah, Rolf, this is very good. Making masks fashionable, new fashion accessory, comedy, yeah, a social nudge, Dylan, that's also really good. Influencers, yes. I mean, you could say, who cares if whatever, Beyonce wears a mask, but we do care, even though Mr. Spock probably wouldn't care. So some things I've been thinking about was, for example, this idea of reframing. This, we could say, I don't wear it for me, I wear it for you. So changing how it's perceived, right? Making it something altruistic, something good for others. Again, it doesn't really matter to Mr. Spock. Then this is an example from Germany. This is not for free, the mask, but they're made available in the subway. So if you get to the subway and you don't have one, to making it more easily accessible. You still have to pay for it and you still need to know that you get them, but just making it more accessible for people to get. And then, as you already said, making it fashionable, right? We've seen all over the place, there's Louis Vuitton masks, but making it fun to wear them by putting a hedgehog on them or some flowers, or matching the brassiere. I've even seen ones on wedding dresses or the same material as the wedding dresses. So again, this shouldn't really matter that much, but we know that it does. So here we go into the nudging category. So hopefully this gave you a bit of an idea of how these different policy instruments or these different ways of changing behavior can play together. And probably we shouldn't be taking away one or two of them, but how bringing all of them together can help us change behavior. So what I like to do when I teach nudging, and I find that it often helps people to have a bit of a framework and think about, okay, what types of, now it just seems, okay, nudges is everything, that's not one of the other three things, that's kind of confusing. So in order to make that a little bit easier for you to work with, we've developed this matrix structure here to categorize nudges, so we can think about them in a more structured way. And the first category is what we call reframe nudges. So this would be anything like, it's the same type of info, it's the same information, but presented in different ways. A little bit we could think about here this idea of reframing the reason for wearing a mask. It's not to protect myself, but it's to protect others. And that could have an effect on the right people. Then we have the category which we call facilitate, and this is all about making it easy. Richard Thaler, when he talks about nudging, always says like, make it easy. So make it easy to do the right thing and take away any friction. So that would be, for example, making the mask easily available, even if people still have to pay. And then we have this category which we call encourage, which is more what I think often if we think about motivation, maybe that's where a lot of these things fall into. So making things fun, making things attractive, telling people what other people are doing, so giving social norms, giving feedback. So all these things that is kind of on top communication and adding something that probably shouldn't matter, but anything that has to do with motivational speeches and those things probably would also even fall in this. I know you might be wondering, it says, oh, she just said that incentives are not nudges, so why does it say incentivize there? So this category is about redesigning incentives in a way that we take behavioral science into account. So this isn't a classic nudge. This matrix is used for working with behavioral science. So I'm going to give you a short example on that, but here the idea is more that we just use these ideas from nudging in order to make incentives more powerful. So what are different examples of, so now we had some examples of nudges in this mask example, and now I'm going to give you a couple of more to get an idea of, okay, what did she mean with this reframing? So here we have an experiment that I did in Gothenburg. So Ingo has probably been to this restaurant before, but I'm not going to say no he is. Maybe he's going to recognize it. It's nice. It's next to a museum. So what we did here is we wanted to see, do people really, truly want to eat the meat dishes, and do they really love meat, which is totally okay? Or is it more that people just take whatever's first on the menu and then they just go with whatever's there? And a lot of people would say, no, if people who like meat really want to order meat dishes. So we put it to the test. The only thing we changed is that we added, or that we changed it says pumpkin here, pumpkin and aubergine and goat cheese. And this is baked lamb, also with pumpkin and goat cheese and aubergine. It's very similar dish, but one is vegetarian and one is with meat. And then the second one was always a fish dish. And the only thing we did, we moved this around, and then we have said down here, we also have a meat alternative, or we also have a vegetarian alternative. So we just flipped the menu here, just reframing. It's the same content still, but presented in different ways. So what do we think? Does it matter whether people eat more meat when they present it with this menu than with this menu? Yes, yes. Very good. All of you agree? Yes. By how much? Well, we found that in this first case, it was about 50-50 between meat and fish. Well, in the other case, it was only 20% who still chose meat. So we still have those people who love to eat meat, and that's also completely okay. But more than that, so about 20% people did choose to eat vegetarian, and 10% more chose the fish dish in that case. So what we see here is that just by reframing, just by reordering these options, we see that we get a change in preferences. Which again, to somebody like Mr. Spock, who's fully rational and who exactly knows what he wants, it really doesn't matter if it's the last dish on the menu or the first dish on the menu, then he's going to choose what he wants. But most of us humans are more like Homer Simpson, and we are more influenced by the order of something. Probably some of you have seen this also in a not so nice way, with putting expensive bottles of wine on the menu and then getting people to feel in comparison that whatever they're getting is quite cheap. Yeah, so you guys saying, is it interesting to do this in different cultures? I think different cultures could be interesting, but I think it's even more interesting to think about, so this was just a high-class restaurant. Well, if you had done this at a steakhouse, I'm sure we would have found no effect, right? Or if you would have done this at a super hipster restaurant where half of the patrons are vegan, we also would have found no effect. But we found this effect because this was like a high-class business lunch restaurant. Probably even at dinner, the effect would have been smaller, because if you go for dinner, right, you want to really read through the menu and discuss with your partner what you want to eat and what wine you're going to have. But here, if you have a 1-hour lunch break, you look at the first part of the menu, like, sounds good enough, I'll have that. So here the idea is really to say that, and that's with all of nudging, and we're going to come to that in a bit more detail, that it has to fit into the context. And I'm very sure that these exact numbers are not going to replicate like that in a different place, but the mechanism will replicate. We've also done this experiment in a university canteen, and it has also been replicated in different countries. And so this effect of the menu ordering, that is stable. The effect sizes, they're going to vary on whatever situation you're in. But especially here to take away is that it worked probably particularly best because people were distracted and they were having a lunch meeting. And then they just took, oh, I read this and the first one sounded good, so I went for that. And only if I really, really hated vegetarian food and really did not like fish, only then did I make it all the way down here to see, oh, there's also a meat alternative. Okay, fine, I'll have that. So another way to think about this is a savings app here. So here they wanted people could download the savings app in order to save money for retirement. And then they did a small experiment to see whether they could get people to save a bit more. And again, this is an idea of how you can use nudging. If you think that, well, if somebody downloads the savings app, then they probably want to save money, right? So we're not trying to get people to do something that they don't want, but if you've voluntarily download a savings app and set it up with your account, this is probably something you do want. So what they did is that they tried to see whether it would make a difference if people in the beginning were asked, on top of you saving this, do you also want to save $150 per month or $5 per day? If you say yes, we're just going to deduct that money from your account. You have to do nothing more. So what do you think? Where did more people want to save? $150 per month or $5 per day? Yes, everybody's in agreement. $5 per day, you're completely right. So if we look at this, far more people wanted to save $5 per day than $150 per month. And obviously, right, again, to Mr. Spock, this is completely irrelevant. It's the same thing, right? 5 times 30 is also 150. So, but to us it matters because we see $5 as, oh, well, I'm not going to have that latte, or I'm going to walk instead of taking the bus for one ride. Well, $150 a month, that's like a Netflix and my gym subscription. Like, that's a lot of things altogether. So it feels different, even though it's the same thing. So those were some of these reframe nudges where we present information that's already given, but we've presented in slightly different ways, and that matters for behavior. But in this encouragement category, so now this is giving additional feedback. And I really like this cute study. It's a colleague of mine in Switzerland. They did this in Switzerland and in Singapore. So they installed these water meters, as you can see here, with these little polar bears. And then they had people shower, and they gave feedback to the people showering. In one group, they only got told the water temperature, so just said, I don't know, 33 degrees. And in these others, they had these polar bears, and the longer you showered and the warmer you showered, the smaller did this ice get, and at some point the polar bear drowns. So it's meant to visualize the idea of you using all this energy and how that has an effect on the climate. And what happened? Well, they found that people shortened their showers by 23%, so that's about 2 or 3 minutes. But interestingly enough, they did not turn down the water temperature. So they were willing to be nudged on the time they spent in the shower, but they were not at all willing to be nudged to reduce the temperature, which could have also decreased the energy consumption. Right? So this is another good learning that we know, okay, people are willing to, they can change in one dimension, but they cannot change on the other one. We all have that temperature we like to shower in, and it's just too much to turn it down. So sometimes it's also good to think about, okay, if we can't get people to change on that dimension, can we find a similar dimension that makes it easier for people to change that? So you could, for example, think, store away paper cups. I could get less takeaway coffees, or I could get coffees in reusable cups. Right? So those are 2 different dimensions on how to change that. And then next we have facilitate. So here, this was an experiment done in Scandinavia at a large hotel chain. And they were interested in reducing food waste at the breakfast buffets. If any of you, and I'm sure you all have, ever been to a breakfast buffet, you see that that's where people go crazy with the food waste, right? They walk past the buffet, they load their plates up, and then they eat 2 of the things they have on their plate. So it's an incredible waste of resources, both for the hotel, but also for the environment in general. But I mean, if you're really, really hungry in the morning, right, you should be eating as much as you want. So what they did here is that they randomized the hotels into 2 groups, and half of the groups had breakfast plates of 24 centimeters and the others had 21 centimeters. Again, shouldn't feel like a big difference. But what happened is there was about almost a 20% reduction in food waste by having these smaller plates. So if you're really hungry, you could go 5 times to the breakfast buffet, right? Nobody, so it's not a regulation, it's not restricting you from from eating as much as you want. But the first time you walk past while you're still hungry from sleeping and everything looks delicious, it just a little bit less fits on your plate, or it looks already fuller the first time around. So if you want more, you can go a second time. Let's see if there's something. Yes. Oh yeah, somebody asked about whether the polar bears was warm water. No, you could take a shower in any, but it just measured the total energy consumption. And that comes from the liters of water and from the temperature of the water together. So yeah, so we are a little bit lazy here. Now the question could be, okay, what happens if we take tiny plates, if we take little saucers and that's it? Well, then probably people would start taking a newspaper and putting the croissants on that, and that might backfire, right? So when we design nudges, we want to be careful that we don't overdo it. So it should still be a large enough plate that you can put a reasonable breakfast on it. And then lastly, I said I'm also going to briefly talk about this idea of redesigning incentives to change behavior. And I also think for a lot of you interested in motivation, this is quite a cool website. So the website is called stick.com. It was designed by Harvard economists, and they thought they have seen some studies where it helps people to be incentivized to do something, lose weight, stop smoking, all the typical things we want to do. But here the website is quite funny because you can set a goal and then you put your own money on the line. So nobody else gives you money. So you say, let's say I want to go running more in the morning. Then I would say, okay, I'm going to put $100 on the line to run 3 times per week, I don't know, the next month. And then I would get somebody. It shouldn't be somebody too nice, right? You want to have a colleague or maybe your sibling or somebody who's going to hold you up to it, not your partner who's going to be too nice with you. And then if you reach the goal, you get to keep your money. So you just get your money back, your own money you put there before, which again, to Mr. Spock is completely unreasonable. Why would anybody do that? But if you missed your goal, then your money goes to good cause or bad cause, right? You could put it to Trump's campaign fund as well, if that's what you would incentivize you not to, or to do with the activity you're planning to do. So in this way, it's not directly nudging, but it's interesting how it combines this idea of using our biases with some type of monetary incentive. Yeah, Ingo's right. You could also be socially embarrassed in whoever you take it in front of. So just a small little exercise. I don't know if this is tricky. We'll see how it goes. So if you think about these categories now, I talked before, this reframing information that's already there or something that's already there, using encouragement, so giving feedback or goals, facilitating, making it easy. So we're just going to do these first three. Which one do you think fits with which? So here we have a sports membership card. So this is that I already pay in January for the whole year. What does that do to me every single month now that I've, in a way, already paid for it in the beginning? Then you can think about a Fitbit. So this just tells me how many steps I've walked every day and how much I've been in my exercise zone. And this here is a picture of Google. And what you can see here is that you only see the healthy food, right? So these are nuts, and then you see the fruits here. And then I've been told that the cookies and the snacks, like the chocolate, is back here. So what do you think out of reframe, encourage, and facilitate? Where do these ones go? Okay. Okay, 2 is encourage. From Lorenza, yes. 1, okay. 3 is facilitate. That's what most of you are saying, yes. So I would agree with that, and there's definitely rooms to argue about this, but I would agree that it makes it a little bit harder. So right now, here was a Google example, we're doing the opposite. We're making it a little bit easier to eat the healthy stuff and a little bit harder to eat the unhealthy stuff. So that would fall under facilitate. Then the Fitbit is the encouragement, right? It gives you the feedback, it gives you some goal setting, so that helps with that. And then this first one, I was thinking that it's, if you already paid for it, then it's a bit like a loss. So every time I don't go to the gym now, it feels like I'm losing money because I already paid for it, right? Whether you go or not, you already spend it. So technically you're not losing anything, it's already gone, but it still feels like a loss. Well, the other way around, I could also say, okay, I'm willing to pay $1,000 the following year to go to the gym, and then I would pay as I go, which for most people would be the better option. But then it feels like every single time you have to pay something, so it feels more expensive than if I pay at the beginning of the year and then I feel this idea of loss. So I'm reframing how I see this going to the gym. Is it, I didn't go today and that's why I'm kind of losing out on something I already paid? Or is this idea that, I might also have to pay as I go? So in that way, it's, of course, this is supposed to be a model that helps you think about nudging. It's not, there's going to be nudges that fit into 2 categories, but from the years of workshops I've been doing on this topic, I think it helps a lot of people to think about this a little bit in such a structure, because that can help you start also matching nudges to the cognitive biases. And that's something we're going to come to now. So for the last time we have together here is, now you might be wondering, okay, that's all nice. I mean, different types of nudges. I often get asked, say, okay, so what are the 5 best nudges to get people to change behavior? And then unfortunately, I have to answer and say that's not possible. Although there's ways of how we can nudge people, there's lots of good examples, you still have to do the hard work. You still have to think about, go through the process of designing a nudge, because a nudge will be the fitting piece to the behavioral bias that you have before. I'm going to show you in a second how that goes. But the idea is that we get off track. So we have these good intentions. Remember, I talked about this intention-action gap. So I have great intentions. I somehow get off track by this cognitive bias. And then what the nudge does, it gets me back on track. But in order to know how to get me back on track, I need to know what got me off track in the first place. So just taking some nudge and applying that, if I don't know what the cognitive bias was that got me there in the first place, might actually get me more off track or might not do anything. And that's really the work you'll have to do if you want to use nudging in an efficient way. And to do that, we've designed this a boost model. It's similar to some other behavior. If you're familiar with behavior change, there are similar models out there. This is the one that, based on the scientific work I've been doing in my research and the professor work, that I think works best, and that we've also refined through many years now doing consulting work and doing work. So since we don't have a lot of time left today, we're just going to look at the first two stages, because I think these are the most important and also the hardest ones to do, and maybe the newest ones to think about. Because I'm sure that this third step we're going to look at, which is coming up with creative nudges, I'm sure most of you are experts in that. There's lots of cool things. I already saw a lot in the chat of cool things one could do. So I'm not worried about that. So we're going to focus on step 1 and 2, because that's a little bit harder to get right. But overall, what we do in this model, the idea is that we first have to decide what is the behavior we want to change. I know this might sound trivial and say, of course we do. But in my experience from a lot of workshops, people will say, oh, I want people to care more about the environment, or I want people to be more productive, or I want people to be more creative. But all these things, these are not behaviors. These are attitudes. These are ways of thinking. But that's not a behavior. To care about the environment, that's an attitude. To turn off the light when I leave my office, that's a behavior. And getting that distinction right between what's a behavior and what's an attitude, that's quite important, because you can only nudge behaviors. You cannot nudge attitudes. And then the second step, it's about understanding the obstacles. So what is actually in the way? What are the cognitive barriers that are keeping me from carrying out this action? Then in the third step, it's about outlining, coming up with cool, creative, maybe even very boring. Mostly the nudges I design are very boring, I have to admit, but often, honestly, the boring ones are the most effective ones. So I'm not very creative, exciting in the nudging space. Although I did some cool ones for Distortion Festival, a big festival in Copenhagen. So if you Google, you can find that on YouTube. That is more in the fun space. Then the fourth part, especially as a researcher, very important to me, is that we need to study and test what really works. So in order to know whether our intervention works in the context that we're in, we need to run a test. In a perfect world, this is a randomized control trial, like in medicine, where we have a placebo and a treatment, and then we compare that. But there's also other ways to do this in a bit more simpler way, especially when working with it privately. And then the last step, we adjust. We have a particular result, and we see, okay, was this a good nudge? Did this really change behavior or not? And how can we adjust it? So now we're running out of time. I hope that some of you will have a couple of extra minutes to stay. So just to give you an idea of this, I'm going to do the first two steps of a case study we did with ICA, this one of the largest supermarkets in Sweden. And the question here was, how can we get more children and young adults to have a healthy lifestyle? So that's more of a meta question. That's not yet a nudgeable behavior. As I already said, it's about getting changed behavior, and to think about also what is a meaningful behavior change. Do we want people to just, I don't know, in this case, just click on login more? That could actually just mean that the app doesn't work, right? Or that they get thrown out. Or what is actually then the behavior that we're trying to change? So in this case, with ICA, our outcome was about getting a healthier lifestyle for children and young adults. But what are behaviors? And then we just brainstormed different behaviors. This could be eating more fruits and vegetables, replacing refined grain with whole grains, limiting our added sugar, right? These are actual behaviors, actual choices we can make. So let's say we take eat more fruits and vegetables as a behavior. And then we come to the next phase where we now have to think about, okay, why aren't people eating more fruits and vegetables? Or maybe even purchasing them. So what we do then is that we want to place ourselves in the mind of somebody who's shopping, a parent with young kids. So he goes into the store and he says, okay, I'm going to buy something super healthy, some nice vegetables, I'm going to make lasagna, and then I'm going to do this. But he's also really hungry himself. One of his kids is running off, and the candy shelf is already doing that. The other kid is crying. And at some point, Michael just thinks, okay, let's just get the frozen pizza, the ice cream, and let's just get out of the store as fast as possible. And then he buys what he always does, frozen pizza, ice cream. That's same thing. So that's what we observe. But now the question is, okay, so what is actually then what's the cognitive bias? So what's the problem here? Is it social norms? Is it that Michael thinks that other parents also don't feed their kids healthy food? Probably not, right? Is it overconfidence? Is he think that his kids aren't going to get sick when they eat junk food every single day? Nah, probably not either. But what it probably is that he's stressed. The kids are crying, wants to go home, he's already hungry himself. And present bias, which means that he overvalues the immediate gratification over a long-term benefit, right? He's hungry and he wants to get out of the store, so he wants to do the thing he always does, which is the fast thing and something that's unhealthy. So now that we've identified these two, and I know this was a very short version of it, but that's just to give you a bit of a taster of how one would do this. Now that we have identified these two barriers, we can then think about, okay, what are the right nudges to design which target this? And saying, you might have heard this before as a nudge, 9 out of 10 people eat their vegetables every day. It's not very helpful if social norms aren't the problem, right? Michael already knows he wants to eat something healthy, and he doesn't care if other kids don't eat healthy things, but he's stressed and he's and he's maybe very hungry and present bias in the situation. So you might want to design a nudge that helps him overcome that, and that makes it easier. Let's say, for example, pre-cut vegetable salads, right? We see that a lot in stores now because that makes it much faster to get something in your stomach, and it doesn't make it as hassle-full as having to choose and cut up vegetables yourself. Okay, so that was a small insight into our boost model. And I know this 1 hour is not, or 50 minutes is not enough time to go through it. It is, of course, a longer process. But that's why we've designed, first of all, a free booklet that you can download from our website. It explains the boost model again. It explains the different barriers I talked about today. So all of that you can see again. You can get that at impactually.se. And then we also have an online course. You can we have a coupon for you, Word Motivation, 20% discount next 2 weeks. It's not expensive at all. The original price is $50. We really care about lots of people learning about this and using nudging in the right way, learning what it actually means. So this is mostly to cover our cost of running this course. But you're also welcome to share this coupon code with somebody else if you think anybody might be interested in that. And yeah, so the course is a longer version of this. It goes through, it has a workbook, it has different quizzes, so it goes through all the different steps of the boost model so you can work with your own case. And it also goes through the ICA case I talked about. So if you want to know how that continued on or what other nudges we came up with, then you can find that out in the workshop. Yeah, Ingo, what's our time? Should we?
Yeah, I think you have 3 minutes left, so you're perfect on time. With that, I love that you have the slide up here on takeaways and questions. And maybe we just end with that. But for those of you who have to leave, I already got a text from Roger here who has his daughter that is on the phone from Atlanta, so he had to leave. But if you have to leave, of course, feel free to leave. We're going to continue next week, Tuesday, with Amy. And as always, you can find the upcoming sessions on schoolofbecoming.org or by registering to our newsletter. Most of you have, so you will get the updates. With that, I would love to spend some more time with you, Christina, and just get a summary of the content, which was wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think there were already a couple of questions in the chat here. So for everybody who has a question, how to apply this in their personal life, how to use this in coaching, which is some of the things that came up, stay with us. And I'm happy to spend 5 or 10 minutes longer, depending on your time, Christina.
Yeah, I'm also happy to stay a little bit longer if there's more questions.
Great. Okay, so fire away. The takeaways.
Okay, so we have a question here. Yeah, how to, I also have the takeaways, but I can take the questions from the chat. How to motivate charitable behavior. So here the question is also, we don't want to, and actually I do have some work on this actually, with how you shouldn't try to motivate people. You do need to be aware whether people actually have this intention to give, right? So of course we could always try to see, can we get people into giving, or maybe use anchoring or something to get them to give more than before. But I think that, and also done some research work on this, that at some point that will backfire, right? So nudging is a lot about thinking about identifying the right people that are already willing to give, but are maybe have a problem because, for example, in Denmark, we don't have cash anymore, right? So if somebody comes to my door and knocks on the door, I can't give to them, even if I wanted to. So now they have this, it's a bit similar to PayPal, it's called mobile pay. They have that to make it convenient to give. And then actually I gave something, but I didn't have any cash at home, or maybe I only have like large bills for emergencies at home and I'm not gonna give that much, right? So the question is often about how can I reduce frictions in those situations where people might already want to give. Okay, we have implementation intentions. Yes, from Courtney. So a question on implementation intentions. So again, I have some research work on this, and in that case, unfortunately, it didn't work. We're looking at, can we get people to plan to take public transport more by nudging them to write down. So implementation intentions, the idea is that you get a prompt to say, oh, when are you planning to take take public transport the next time? You can write it down here. You don't actually need to write it down, but the idea of triggering this thought process is then that people then maybe think about, oh yeah, I should actually do that. I can do this on Thursday. It does sometimes work. It works very well with more one-time behavior. So there's some evidence that in order to get people to vote or to get a vaccine, which is kind of a one-time activity at in a special time set, there it can work well because I might already want to do this, but then somehow I don't really make a plan for it and the week is over and then I didn't do it. It doesn't seem to work that well in repeated behaviors. We've seen some evidence also on gym studies that there was no effect either to plan. You can't really tell yourself, oh, I'm going to go to gym every single week. At least there's no scientific evidence that it works on repeated behaviors. There's a question from Urban using for diversity, nudging for diversity and inclusion. So we've done some work on that as well. There's actually a nice podcast by my co-founder. So the podcast itself is called Behavioral Grooves. Some of you might already know this, but otherwise it's also a fun podcast. I also did one, but she talks about, so Nurit Nobel, my co-founder, I can maybe just write her name in the chat and, oops. Oh, no, I put this to the wrong message, sorry. Okay, great, somebody already wrote this. There. So now you have it in chat. So she actually talks about a project that we did with a tech company in Stockholm to try to use different nudges for diversity and inclusion. And also our last newsletter had a lot of links on that as well. So if you go on our website, then definitely on LinkedIn. I'm not sure if you can get directly from the website, but other than that, send me an email. I'm happy to forward the newsletter because we have a lot of different recommendations there as well, especially also now in the Black Lives Matter movement and different questions about diversity and inclusion in there as well. Okay. Now it's a good question from Minna here about how to pick out which behavioral bias it is. That's an excellent question because there's a lot. If you go on Wikipedia, there's probably 250 biases. In my courses, I only use 5, and I think these 5 are the most researched ones. I've not yet, on hundreds of practitioners, have come across a situation where none of these 5 were relevant. You can find them in a course, but I'm also going to say it now. It's present bias, so this immediate gratification versus long-term gains, social norms, loss aversion, so thinking more about what could go wrong than what could go right, overconfidence, and cognitive load. So the idea of being too stressed and not being able to pay attention to things, just missing things because I'm stressed. So those 5 biases, I think if you work with those and in the course, we also have a matching matrix where we can then match these biases to the right nudges. In my experience, that gives you 90% of the way. And a lot of also these IKEA effect or halo effect, these smaller ones, they're not that well researched as well. So I don't think I would spend too much. So I personally don't work so much with those. I work a lot with what we call risk preferences, social preferences, and time preferences, and those are covered by those 5. Okay, what else do we have? Okay, we have cool, somebody using this for learning. Yeah, I mean, there's of course everywhere, I think, where people have this intention action gaps. They want to do something, but somehow things are in the way. That's really excellent solutions or situations where nudging can be used. Then we have a question from Julian about how to use this in organizations. Yes, so I don't really, we have some some of things we have already written up on our website as well. There we've also summarized our case studies, but actually one we just did was an unemployment agency, which is a little bit more about internal organization. That's not yet written up. So if you stay tuned, hopefully we're going to manage to write that up as a case pretty soon. But yes, also for efficiency. But I would say it's always, every time I work with it, it's the starting point is the boost model and defining behaviors, understanding which barriers are there, and then thinking about different nudges. So that's also why that's what I mostly teach, the process and not the results to be copy pasted into other situations. So you can draw inspiration from other cases, but I suggest really doing the hard work and going through this process. You can also use other models that are similar to that. I'm not claiming this is the only way to do it from service design, but using that process rather than trying to just copy paste from other situations. Yeah, there's more. I mean, I'm happy to stay. It's, there's still a lot of questions.
I think the questions are great. Like, there's one that stood out for me, Christina, which I also wanted to ask. So I have it here on the list, but it's like from and please forgive me if I don't pronounce your name correctly, Saruchana, who's asking, why is nudging not working with attitudes? Can gradual change in one's behavior affect the attitude later?
Yes. So I think I'll answer the second part first. So sometimes you might think that, or somebody will try to explain nudging a bit like you get people to change behavior, and that can result in a change in their attitudes. Well, something like marketing works more in the way of you get to change people's minds and then they go buy something, right? So you make people feel like that's something they want, or they're going to be a cool person if they own this, and then they go buy it. Well, with nudging, it's more that I get you to order the vegetarian thing 3 times because it's on top of the menu, and then you're like, actually, I kind of like vegetarian food. It's not as bad as I thought. So both things can go together, but because attitude, so first of all, I mean, it's also what we measure with nudging, but it is about not thinking about it, right? Because when we think about attitude change, then it's a lot about in this information part, it's our system to thinking, because then it is, you could still say, okay, it might be still emotional, but it's still something that rationally, so if I would ask you about it, you might still say, oh yeah, I do want to buy that new perfume, or I want to do these things. So that's how I'm getting you to change your attitudes. But then nudging doesn't work on that level, because once I get you to reflect on it, then in a way also the nudge won't work. Because if I tell you about how I structured the menu, then often of times it's not, that's not really what happens. So you can think about, so over time, I'm sure that a lot of nudges can get us to change behavior, but that's not directly how it works. But you can think about it as 2 parts, the more the marketing, convincing people part, also the advocacy, communication, social media campaigns, all these things. But then if you think about hiring, for example, you could say, okay, we need people to be aware that in this whole Black Lives Matters, and we need diversity, and we need diversity training. But then when it comes to receiving the CVs, well, it still does help actually to black out the names. I shouldn't have probably said black out, but wipe out, whatever, not show them, because we do know that we are slightly biased, and it can help us to make better decisions. So even though my training might be perfect, this bias is still going to come out in some way. So it's really about bringing these 2 things together.
And Christina, there's a question from Anna that links to that, which is she's asking about inclusive work culture. And she has seen several apps and she wonders if some of them are actually effective or helpful, and if you had any recommendations or ideas about them.
Yeah, I have to admit I'm not, so an app that or a system that I really like is Applied. It's from the Behavioral Insights team. It's for HR, so it makes the recruitment process less biased. So it uses behavioral science in order to take out everything that you could be biased about as well as possible. So that I know that works really well, but that's probably less of this type of an app here. I think the problem with a lot of apps is that if people aren't already very motivated to use them, so I often get asked to consult on sustainability apps. So where you put in how many minutes you showered today and what you exactly ate. And yeah, the most motivated people in the world are probably going to use it for 3 days and then never use it again. And I think with some of these feedback apps or something, it might be similar. So you might probably need some really good incentives or rules that they need to be used by everybody in the company, because otherwise you're going to end up only with the best or most motivated people. So I usually think it's nicer if you can build in the app, if you can build in the nudge into something that's already there, right? So you want to put it into the environment, not have people think about it and then use it. You want to think about how can I redesign the intranet or the login system or the coffee kitchen. How can I maybe put, I don't know, the coffee machine in a different place so that people will actually see each other and talk to each other? I think it's going to be far more powerful than having something as an app. But if the app helps you to design these things, that might work as well. But again, so I'm not 100% sure about how these apps all work.
Okay, Christina, as we are like approaching 10 minutes past the hour, and I don't want to hold up people too long, I have a last question, which is, and I already know part of the answer, which is probably subscribe to your newsletter, but
Yes.
People are asking for where can they find more resources, podcasts, and other things that you would recommend when it comes to nudging.
Okay, so first of all, we have the monthly newsletter, which we spend a lot of time on putting everything together that we love, and also our thoughts on is everything evidence-based and what we've seen in the past. So there's a lot of actual information, but you can also go on our website, impactually.se, so this is for Sweden, where we have a tab on a lot of articles we wrote about our own projects, about case studies. Our podcasts are linked there. There's a media tab. It has all my talks that are on YouTube, so links to our YouTube channel as well. You can definitely follow me on Twitter. I'm relatively active, posting interesting studies that I see or events, things like these as well. So I'm super happy also to talk to you there, and definitely feel free to send me an email or get in touch either on LinkedIn or on Twitter as well. I mean, I do this because I want to educate people, and there's so much more we could have talked about today. As you can probably tell, I try to give you as much value and as much things as possible in a short time, but definitely feel free to reach out. I'm super happy to help you. But yeah, for the Boost model, I mean, the course, we really try to design that. It's a self-study, it's videos, short videos, short quizzes, workbook, so that you can work with that as well.
Great. Christina, thank you so much for joining us today and spending the extra time. I think this was super informative. I can already tell by the chat that a lot of people really enjoyed the session. And since we have 35 people spending overtime here with us today, I'm sure like we all loved your session and took something away from it. I definitely did. I have a bunch of notes from today. So thank you so much for taking the time. And also thank you for everybody who joined us.